welcome to the show, both of you. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for trying to get the interview last night, and thanks for kind of pushing through the troubleshooting. Thank you for trying again tonight. If you don't mind going ahead and introducing yourself, Kat Co, you can go ahead and start.
Okay. Yeah, so my name's Kat. I live in Lander, Wyoming, and got in touch with you, Ashley, last month, to do like a short recording for your podcast. And then yeah, thought that talking about broad beta would be a really awesome thing to do on your show. I'm a part of broad beta um as the podcast producer. So we started the podcast maybe a year ago, and we do story recordings like of the stories that are contributed to our website. And we also do interviews of amazing female identifying athletes.
Great.
Mhm.
And now why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Jeannie, and I started BroadBeta, and I get to work with amazing people like Kat and a number of other women and genderqueer folks on a new mission to basically embolden women um, to share wild ideas and wild experiences, and also the preservation of wildness. And it's becoming a really powerful endeavor and wonderful community, and I feel really lucky to be part of it. So I've worked in the outdoor industry my whole life and career in product development, and this is kind of a culmination of that. And my quest to sort of elevate women and queer and those on the margins in our industry.
Well, thank you. And you live in Bozeman, Montana.
I do.
Okay. And Kat, you said you live in Lander, Wyoming.
I live in Lander. Yeah, I've been
Okay.
here for about 3 years and have
Cool.
kind of lived all over different desirable places to live for climbers.
Lucky.
Yeah.
And so, Jeannie, what is broad beta? What is it?
So part of it is exactly what it sounds like. It's beta for women, broads, strong women, and it grew into something much larger, which is um, we share stories. As Kat said, we have podcast interviews, we have gear reviews that are specific to women, um, pro tips. We have a whole section on food and nutrition and how we all, as mountain people, live with um, our food challenges and body issues and et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. But basically, it grew out of my time in product development working with all these folks and a lot of great women in focus groups that I would put on. And we would talk about fabrics and products, and I would share with them all this information, and then we would get into kind of the meat of like, okay, what are the problems out there, like how can we solve them, because I was looking to figure out where the companies that I worked for could fill these gaps and create something useful, right, for climbers and skiers. And always I was doing both for men and women, but I was really passionate about trying to elevate women's products in the industry. And so anyway, these women would sit around and they'd go, well, why isn't this information out there on fabrics and such?
Mhm.
You should start a gear review site. And I
Mhm.
was like, yeah, that sounds like a giant headache. Like, and but it kind of kept going around and around, and Jewel Lunn and I used to go climbing and kind of brainstorm on it. And I was like, okay, we need a good name if we ever do this. And she came up with the term broad beta. And I basically tabled it, bought the domain, and didn't do anything for 6 years uh, until I met Leslie Gaines Germain and in
Who was
Bozeman.
actually on my podcast before? What
Oh,
wasn't
Yeah, she was
she
like
was?
maybe like 4 years ago or something,
oh wow,
telling a
great.
story about an accident, like maybe on the Diamond or in Rocky or yeah.
Oh, I can't remember what location that episode was from, but I do remember interviewing her.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Well, she and I, we embarked on climbing the nose of El Cap, and there were so many different aspects of that relationship that we went through to make that whole thing come together, and it was pretty profound for both of us, our friendship and our partnership, and we were the only women on El Cap at the on the nose at the time. We got lucky; we were doing it during COVID, so it actually wasn't that crowded. But we came away from that and we're skiing, later on in the winter. And I told her about this idea and we kind of got to the top and she's like, we have to do this. We have to start this. And we should kind of promote, women's partnerships in the mountains because there aren't that many. And it really changes how we relate and how we see climbing and ourselves and what we learn. And it's like, so we could tell these stories and we could have a gear review. And I was like, I'm in. If you're in, I'm in. It's like I needed someone psyched, and kind of with this other perspective, to sort of get me to launch this and get off the ground. And so she and I started it together, and that's
And
been
when
really,
when did you start it? Because you had the idea 6 years, or at least
yeah. We
6 years
just
before you
started it.
started it.
I think we're about 2 years in right now.
Okay.
So we started with these written stories, and the idea was also grew out of the like all these amazing women like Kat and you and all these others who've done these amazing things, but maybe you're not sponsored or famous or
Mm-mm.
in the old days we had magazines that might tell your story, and we just don't, other than people sort of having their own social media feed, right, and or a company that sponsors them to kind of bring out their story. We don't get these sort of hidden gems that are out there, and so our quest is to find those and to bring them out in written form or bring them out in a podcast. But I think our stories are what inform us. They're what form us. They form our culture, and I think we've had this version of a story in our industry, right? I mean, if you go to a crag, it's always put up by men, and the routes are named mostly by men, and I kind of envision this world where it's like, what if you walked up to a crag and it was put up all by women and they were named by women and rated by women, and it would just be like it would be a different kind of world, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and I think that's our quest, is like empowering women to sort of get inspired by other women, really find your kind of true self, your inner warrior, and not and get the strength to go after that and then share that with other women and queer folks. And I think that if we have a space, which is what we're trying to create, that allows you to be vulnerable and really honest and truthful, that space to be vulnerable is also where we gain strength. And I think in our culture, at least for me growing up, it was very much like, oh, women can do everything now, and women are on an equal level as men. And you get in the industry, and I ran product lines for different companies and developed a lot of product, and I can tell you it was like you never were equal. I mean, I just it never felt like women were going to get that same footing, and I think that's what needs to change, just to evolve our culture and the industry and our sports to something that feels so much healthier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Kat, why did you get involved with BroadBeta?
Yeah, so Leslie is a good friend of mine, and she contacted me like 2.5 years ago when this was still sort of like a brainchild of her and Jeannie. And before I became a nurse, um, yeah, back in the day, I did freelance photography and a little bit of writing. And so she reached out to me to like help with some creative stuff, to do some still photos and to write a story. So I wrote a story for, I think it was like the third story that was released on the website or something. So yeah, contributed some early content and then did some still photos for the tech tips that we did in the very beginning, like mainly how to tie knots, like still photos showing like the progression of tying a munter hitch and a butterfly, and Like
They're
an
like incredible
oh,
illustrations, by the way. And they're still on our website. So
they're still on there. I think I'm actually gonna start like an Etsy shop and try to sell them. But because it was super fun to do, but still photos didn't really like make a lot of sense for tech tips. Like it makes so much more sense to like watch a video of someone doing the thing, like making a V thread or whatever. So I sort of like was in this spot like maybe 6 months in of like, wow, I love being involved with these folks that are like making BroadBeta a thing. And I loved like scratching that itch of being creative when in my full-time job as a nurse, it's, it's science and math for the most part and customer service. So doing creative stuff for BroadBeta was like this thing that I didn't want to go away from my life. So we had been talking about starting a podcast, and I was like, well, shoot, I'm pretty familiar with Adobe programs from working in photography, so maybe I could figure out like how to do a podcast. So and I think like I'm like naturally a super curious person. Like, I mean, even Ashley, when you and I got on the Riverside link yesterday, I'm just like want to know you. Like, I want to ask you questions. Like, and so I'm really enjoying the interviewing part of the podcast. And yeah, maybe that's why I'm part of why I'm still here. But I think like on a deeper level, Jeannie and I were talking a little while ago about like, yeah, like what is it that makes us want to be a part of BroadBeta? And I think for me,
Mhm.
like, when I was working as a guide, my like relevance to the industry was like very obvious and just sort of like implied, and my like place in the community and in like the tribe of climbers was also like something that I didn't need to like look for, and it was just like built into my everyday. And then when I stepped away from guiding and became a nurse, I felt like a lot of grief around like
Mhm.
losing that place in that community. And when Leslie reached out to me to like to work with BroadBeta, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, I don't know, it just felt like perfect timing for like bringing that back into my life in sort of like a structured way. So that's a really long answer, but
Well, thank you for sharing. So it's a website and a podcast, right? But how can one get involved with Broad Beta?
so there are a number of ways, and we're evolving the opportunities for that as we go forward here in the next few months as well. But right now, the best thing is just email us if you want to write a story or be interviewed. And we would love anyone and everyone who has a transformative experience, as a woman in climbing and skiing, or just an adventure you want to share that you think is interesting, inspiring. Um, you can write it. We could podcast it. We could do an audio. Um, you could email us on a gear review that you want to see, because we're open to evolving our gear reviews. We're going to start doing more videos. My whole background is in product development and fabric, so um, I think we're going to start doing something a little more active there, in the sense that we do kind of quicker reviews on products that we're all using and do a video. And that's one of the places we're going to try to have it be more of a forum where you could write in on the site and be like, hey, but this is a product I've used. These are climbing pants that I love, and you didn't review them, or here's why I love them, and here are my comments on things maybe we did review. So that's a place where it'll be a much better opportunity for folks to get in and actually have a voice. And then we do these events. I just did one for the Bozeman Ice Fest, and we call them the broadcasts.
Oh,
And
funny.
yeah, that's another friend who coined that one really fast. It was hilarious. But I never want to get into running events. I mean, I've done plenty. I've been the president of the Friends of the Avalanche Center here, putting on fundraisers for like 20 years. But But I will say it's so inspiring because it brings everything we're doing kind of, um, to a personal level, right? We had 100 women there, and 4 women gave these short kind of TED Talk like presentations, and they're really different presentations. Some are super vulnerable and they expose something really heartfelt. Some are just kind of crazy, awesome adventures that inspire us all to get out in the mountains. Um, but all the women come and we kind of socialize, have pizzas, beers. And so that's another way to get involved, is show up to these broadcasts, or let us know if you want to have one in your hometown, because I'm starting to build kind of a schedule of doing these in various different places.
Anchorage,
Yeah,
Alaska.
I'll
I'll
come. I
host
come
you.
to Anchorage every year. I love it.
Yes, I'll host you for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's really fun, and it's so interesting. Like last year we had, some really, really intense, heartfelt talks. Like
Yeah.
Nikki Smith gave one about being a transgender woman climber coming to Montana for the festival, and it was intense because
Hmm.
you know, she doesn't want to be tokenized, but also like she wanted people to know the struggle that she goes through, and so that's what we're trying to bring out and support. And I think that we want to hold everybody up, and that those events allow us to do that really in person. And I don't know, it's inspired me to try to motivate to do more of those for sure. But it's sort of a live version of what we're trying to do on the website, or um, in written form. And so I think we're taking on these different elements. We have, also, if you have recipes or a story of your journeys with food as a climber and a skier, which I think all of us as women have had.
Hmm.
It's kind of a safe place to share that. And one of the things that's kind of unfolding is this honesty that's coming out. I think so often we're programmed to just toughen up, be like the guys, just be strong, or maybe you're the strongest woman in the small pond. But like just being more honest about all these things we're going through, because I'm a woman in my 50s, and I just I just went through menopause, and nobody talks about what it's like to be
Hmm.
a decent level athlete going into that. And I wrote a story and kind of had to do sort of self-discovery of it. And I mean, we shouldn't have to, like, I want to share those things, or our journeys with food and struggles, with our bodies. And that stuff affects who we are. It affects our confidence, everything. And if we can be more honest in a place of support, and then it's sort of that stuff just kind of like it gets distilled, where you're like, okay, now what am I really about? Now it's like, okay, now I want to go do this stuff. Like I can do this too.
I think I
Um,
would also add like as far as people getting involved, like we want broad beta to be relatable to every
Hmm.
level of mountain athlete, like it's not just a platform for professionals, it's a platform for the athlete. I mean, hey, when we get a professional that is willing to do an interview, awesome. Like we all want to hear their stories, obviously, but we also want to hear stories
The Ashley, who
from
just is just
from
just a woman in Alaska who's doing a podcast. I'm nothing. I'm nobody special, but
yeah,
that's what my podcast is all about too. Is like just like you're
totally.
saying. I'm grateful if I can get a pro on here once every 3 years, but I don't go for athletes to be on the show. I go for Ashley's, just
yeah,
the
Yeah,
regular
yeah.
person who goes to work 8 to 5
yeah,
and comes home and maybe recreates on the weekends because I that's the only time I've got to. And
yeah.
so
Yeah.
I
But
think making it
you've got
relatable is really
stories.
important.
And that's
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of our target, is like there's lots of things for beginners that are amazing to get beginners out into climbing and skiing in the outdoor realm. And there's plenty of forums for sponsored folks to have their voice, right? But
Hmm.
it's that meet in the middle. It's that
Hmm.
it's just like there's so many stories there that we want to hear and that should be told and that inspire us.
Yeah.
And I think one other thing that's super important to us is the connection to wilderness and wildness. And I want to stress that, because it's you know the realm that we play in, that you know that wildness that we still have in our world, and especially in the West out here, is so critical to forming who we are and how we see ourselves in the world. And it's really a big part to me of what BroadBeta can affect and kind of bring out is like these experiences that we have in wilderness, that it's kind of cliche, but it's like Thoreau, in wildness, it's like the preservation of us and the world, right? It forms everything and it shapes us. And you live in Anchorage, lucky you. Like Alaska is one of my favorite places in the world, and if I don't go to Alaska at least every other spring, I like feel like my soul is like starting to just kind of like
Ditto,
dry
sister.
up. But it's so magical, right?
Yeah.
And then you go do that with a woman partner or a queer partner, somebody maybe who's not, you can't rely on to do everything, and it just, I don't know, you discover so much. And I grew up a tomboy, never thinking I needed girls groups and, women specific things. And I went to work at Patagonia, and the women ran that place at the time when I was really young. And it changed my life to work with these amazingly talented women who were so supportive, of even me, who was really competitive, coming in, because that's how I related in the world. And it just like, it shaped my life. Like it completely changed me. And I think I feel really lucky for that experience. And I went on to work for companies that didn't relate that way. And I think that's what came full circle for me to want to do this, is just like really create a place for community like that, where we can all like just meet these amazing women and queer folks and be so inspired and just relate to the world in a different healthier way.
That's beautiful. Beautifully said. So what is the website to find? Where can I find BroadBeta on the internet?
BroadBeta.com. It's BroadBeta.com. And then it is broad.beta for Instagram.
Okay. And what about the podcast? What's the podcast called? BroadBeta?
It's the BroadBeta podcast.
And where is that? Spotify, SoundCloud?
So that is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Sorry, I'd have to bring up my list. It's basically all the
Usual
places,
suspects.
all the places that Buzzsprout lets you publish podcasts.
Cool. Perfect. And if you can't find it on where you listen to your podcast, then find it at one of the ones that Kat Co mentioned.
And send us your stories or call us and let
Yeah.
us interview you. I mean, I don't know if you all remember like the days of the Patagonia catalog, when it was always, the stories were always written by people you didn't know. They weren't famous and they had amazing photos, and you kind of get that, or your favorite magazine, and you'd sit down and just be like, you couldn't wait to read them. That's what we want this to be like. We want all of us to just crave this. Like, you can't wait for the next story to come out and the next interview to come out. And there's so many great stories out there for us all to share. So,
Well, thank you, ladies, very, very much. Is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with about BroadBeta or about yourselves?
well, I mean, you empower women, you change the world, right? So join
Empower
us
women.
and yeah, let's
Yeah.
go.
And if there's people that people want to hear from on the podcast, we're always looking for good ideas of women or female identifying folks to interview.
Great.
And thank you, Ashley. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thank you.
Well, thank you both for being here very much. I'm very appreciative of you both and what you're doing.
Likewise.
Oh.